Hello, we are going to deploy and install a React Node-based application in a fresh Ubuntu server. So we see that the server is Ubuntu, the Ubuntu Bionic. So we are going to install a CouchDB database. So we have to add the source into the source list. So we are going to use a sudo command and a nano to edit the source list. So inside the source list, we have to add the source of the CouchDB installation, the CouchDB repository. So we have to copy that line of code and add that line of code into the source list file. We have to change the distribution name to Bionic. So now it's done. We have to exit and save the file. And now we have the repository add to the source list. So now we have to download the key, the repository key. So the repository is secure to download. So the next step is to install CouchDB database using the apt-get command. So we are going to download the database installer, and the database will prompt an installation interface. So we are going to choose a standalone, and in this case I want to be the database to be public, so I can access from any IPs from any computer. But in the case you want the database only be accessible from within the local host, you can put the localhost IP. It's up to you. I have to enter a password, and the database is finished its installation. So I want to show you that I have a server. This is the server where I am installing the database. This is the IP. So I have to go to this IP, and I have to also write the port of the CouchDB database. So the installation is finished, and I can see the database process writing systemctl status CouchDB. So I can see the CouchDB server is running. So I can go to the IP, the ports, and write utils, and this is the web panel of the database. So I can write my username, in this case is admin, my password, and I can see the default database collections, so everything is okay. So what I'm going to do next is to create an SSH key from within my server. So this allows me to connect to my GitHub account and download the repository. So I'm going to paste this command, I'm going to change my email address, and I'm going to create a SSH key with no password. So it's created. So it's under the folder SSH. So I can see the content of the folder. I can see the content of my public key that I created. So I can copy this key. This is the public key because the private key is never shared. I have to use the public key to go into my settings in my GitHub and add this key to the key list. So now the key is add, so I have to put my password in GitHub. So after that I can download the repository with git clone. I have to make sure that Git is installed on my server. Usually servers have Git by default. So git clone the repository, so everything is cloned okay. I can see the folder of my application, my Node application, and I can check the contents of the folder. So now it's time to install Node. And install Node is very simple. There are many information of how to install Node. We're going to use a Node source to install it, to install the latest version. So it's going to install Node 12. So I'm going to download the installation script, and then I'm going to execute the installation script of Node source. Node source is an application program that allows us to install a version of Node that is the runtime for JavaScript. So I'm going to, as you see, Node is not yet installed. I have to install it with sudo apt-get install node, because node source only allow us to have the repositories ready for installation. So now I'm actually installing Node, and finally Node is installed. I can check the version with Node B, so it's version 12.16. So this is the directory, this is the folder of my project, and I have to install Node dependencies, Node module with npm install. So with the command npm install, I'm installing the modules. It usually takes a while. So it's installed. The Node modules are installed. So is everything okay? And next, I have to create the database collections. So this application has some commands to create the database. So the database are listed in database.json. So I have to add this new database to the database.json file. So I'm going to put this database as a production database. So I have to check that the user is admin and the password is the password of the database I have created. So I'm going to also put as a default database. So if I have the credentials okay, I can access the database with that credentials. So I'm going to use the production database, and everything is okay. So I'm going to write the change to the file, to the database.json file. So I can check if the credentials are correct. So they look fine. Now I'm going to execute this command, npm run create db. So I copy and paste this command, and it's creating the databases, the collections and the indexes and the first documents into the database. So I can refresh, and there are the databases that are created, and some documents that are necessary for the application to run for the first time. So I also have a backup of a previous database with some example files, with some example documents. So I'm going to restore this database with this command, that is npm run restore db. So I'm going to copy that command and execute it. So the database is restored. So now I have some objects, some documents inside my collections. So for example, the collection offers have some offers, so everything is okay. So I'm going to start the application with npm start, and the controllers and the express server and the functions are going to be loaded. So the application is started and running in the port 3008. Also, Webpack has compiled the JavaScript and static files. So this is an error, well, not an error, but a bug, because we are not in a development environment. But I had correct that behavior. So Webpack is not didn't have to start. So the application is up and running in the port 3008. So we can test the application and see if the application is displaying correctly, if everything is working, if the application is making the queries to get data from the database. The components are rendering okay. So the database, the application, the Node React application front end is okay. So, and the backend also is okay. So the application depends on the console. So if I exit the process in the console, the application just dies. So the application need to be running in the console. So this is a problem. We can solve it by making the node process to keep alive after we exit the console. So we need a process manager to do that. So we are going to keep testing the application. The application is okay. The search logic of the application looks okay also. So I'm going to show you again that the application stops if the console stops. So the process needs to keep running. So for that we are going to install PM2, that is a process manager. That this is the install script for PM2. We have to write npm install PM2 globally with sudo as a super user, because the application needs some special permissions. So PM2 is installed globally, so we can use the PM2 command to run the application, but I have put a command inside the npm package JSON, so we have to run npm run PM2. So the application now is up and running. So we can see that the actual command that we have execute is PM2 start app with a name that is pathways, so we can differentiate the app. So the app is now running as a service, I mean as a system process managed by PM2. So now we are going to install Nginx to use our custom domain for serving this application. The installation script is very simple. It used sudo apt-get install Nginx, and Nginx is now installed. So now we need a web domain. I actually have one that is, its DNS are managed by Cloudflare, so I can create a subdomain that the configuration for subdomain are domains are the same. So I have to create a record, I have to give it a name, and I have to point this subdomain to an IP address. So in this case is the IP address of my server. So I paste my IP address, I click save, and I have registered my domain configuration. Okay, so I have to test if my subdomain is pointing my IP address. So I'm going to go to DNS checker and see if pathways.un.p resolved to my IP. So it resolved to my IP, so everything is okay, looks good. So next I have to edit the Nginx config. I have to add a new file in the config directory of Nginx. So I'm going to go to that directory, and there is empty, so I have to create a new file with nano. The file have to end with the .config extension. So I have to copy this code, this configuration code, and paste it, and I have to replace this string with my domain. So the idea is that Nginx will resolve this domain to the port that is running, so it can show the node process when you visit that domain. So I'm going to test the configuration. The configuration is okay, and then I'm going to restart Nginx. So Nginx is restarted. So I'm going to change to my actual user. I'm going to check the status of the Nginx process. So Nginx is up and running, so that's good. No errors. So I'm going to see if my domain is working. So I'm going to pathways.un.pe. So it's not working. So why is this happening? It's because the HTTP address is not working, because in my case my actual domain doesn't resolve HTTP. Have to use always HTTPS. So I have to install a HTTPS SLL certificate for that to happen. So Nginx is working, the server is working fine, and I'm going to test it without the secure connection. So the domain is working right, but it has no HTTP, it has no SSL certificate, so it's going to have some issues. So the next step is installing Certbot. So Certbot for Nginx, and in this case for Ubuntu 18. So the installation of Certbot is very intuitive, and in the web page you have all the instructions. So I'm going to check that the Pathways application is online, so it's good. So I'm installing Certbot. So I'm going to copy and paste this line of code at the repository. So I think the repository is already add. So I'm going to add the Certbot repository. So I'm adding the Certbot repository. Okay. And now I'm going to update my repository list, my package list. So I'm now going to actually install Certbot. So I copy and paste this line of code. Certbot is installing, and Certbot will give me a SSL certificate, Signet, Let's Encrypt SSL certificate. That is a free certificate for my website, for my domain. So I'm going to execute a sudo certbot nginx, because it has a configuration compatibility with Nginx. I have to give my email address. I have to read these prompts, and I have to select my domain, the domain for which I'm going to issue my certificate. Is making a challenge to see if I am the owner of that domain. I mean, if the domain are pointing to my server. So I pass the challenge. I'm going to redirect the HTTP to HTTPS, and it's okay. So now I have to add the certificate. I'm going to test it. I'm going to test the HTTPS, and now my site is working fine, because now I have the HTTPS certificate. So now it's looking good. Everything is working as expected. So my site is up and running. So I'm going to also test the admin panel. I'm going to enter the admin panel. These are the offers. the local offer password settings, the database is working fine, and the application is finally deployed for production in the server.